I'm Mike Ward and welcome to Conversations in Healthcare, a video series brought to you by DRG, part of Clarivate. This episode is one of a number that we're recording alongside On Helix, a digital conference that is hosted by One Nucleus. The overarching theme of the meeting is transforming new medicine discovery. To do this effectively and sustainably, organizations need to have confidence that the approaches that they're taking will deliver a return on investment. In light of this, I thought it might be useful for us to have a better understanding of epidemiology and how that can help companies across the whole healthcare continuum make better go, no-go decisions, whether it's early stage biotechs who are looking at resource trade-offs in their R&D pipeline, or commercial companies developing tactical marketing plans, or for those who are actually in charge of manufacturing to help them determine actually the number of units that they're going to need to make. So I'm delighted to be joined by my DRG colleague, Mike Hughes. Mike is a Senior Director of Epidemiology at DRG, and he manages a global team of epidemiologists who are supporting the strategic decision-making at both pharma and biotech companies. So Mike, I hope you and all those you care about are keeping well and safe, and thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you.
So Mike, as the pandemic has developed this year, epidemiology is one of those terms that actually has entered into sort of common day speech. So I just thought it might be helpful if you could sort of set the scene by first giving us a definition of what actually epidemiology is.
Sure. Epidemiology is the study of the risk distribution and determinants of disease in other healthcare states, but at a population level. So we're not interested in the disease as it occurs in an individual, but at a population level. For commercial entities like pharma companies, biotechs, and so on, the emphasis in epidemiology is on estimating the size of the eligible disease populations that they're interested in, as well as some other specialist areas such as pharmacoepidemiology and pharmacovigilance or drug safety.
Right. And as my understanding goes, that there are essentially two approaches for modeling the sort of epidemiology associated with diseases. One focuses on prevalence and the other one on incidence. What are the sort of the key differences and challenges associated with either approach?
Okay, so incidence, just to be clear, that's new cases of a disease over a particular period. And when we estimate incidence, particularly when we're trying to size the eligible drug treatable population, for example, that's most useful for acute conditions where the disease does not enter some kind of chronic state. Prevalence, on the other hand, which is all those who are living with the disease or with the history of the disease, is obviously more relevant for chronic diseases like diabetes and so on, that will last potentially a lifetime.
Right. Okay. So, can you give us some sort of example of the sort of when either approach is most appropriate, or are there instances where, in fact, sort of both approaches are relevant? Yeah.
So, as you may have noticed, there's a pandemic raging at the moment, and it's quite an acute disease, lasting maybe 1 or 2 weeks, maximum, a month or so. There, we're much more interested in the incidence of the disease. That is, how many people develop the disease, COVID-19, over a year, let's say, or a month. But other diseases that we would use to model incidence are pneumonia, for example, as well as acute events like heart attacks, pulmonary embolism, and so on. Prevalence, there we would use it for chronic diseases, so not just the ones that are often age-associated, like heart failure and diabetes, but also almost all genetic disorders, because the person will have those for the entire lifetime. So if it's a drug that, for example, that suppresses gene expression and you take a tablet a day, for example, then obviously prevalence is going to be much more interesting than the incidence of the disease.
Right, right.
Having said that, there are several diseases where both are relevant, particularly in cancer, where, for example, there may be both an acute phase or phases of the disease, such as newly recurrent cases or newly diagnosed cases, but also a chronic prevalent population where, for example, in breast cancer or prostate cancer, they may be eligible for long-term drug treatment to reduce recurrence risk, for example.
So the traditional biotech model is to get a drug candidate at least to a phase 2 proof of concept before they would license it out to a major pharmaceutical company. So I was wondering, what role does a good grasp of the epi actually have in, say, for example, those partnering discussions? I mean, do you have sort of any examples of how you might have helped companies in this respect?
Yeah, sure. So obviously epidemiology is fundamental there, particularly because it's often in a kind of virgin terrain where the existing drug therapies are just palliative or not very effective. And it's fundamental because the crucial ingredient in any ROI calculation for a new molecule or other treatment is how many patients will be treated with it and for how long. Any major pharmaceutical company will be doing those calculations themselves, or at least want to see them, obviously. And we quite often do that kind of work, from both sides of the table, to help a big pharma or other investment entity assess the revenue potential of a new molecule, as well as helping smaller biotechs in getting those initial estimates of the size of the drug treatable population. And for disruptive technologies, that may be it may be quite complex, because the drug itself, particularly if it's something that dramatically changes survival or reduces disease progression or whatnot, can actually change the epidemiology of the disease. So there needs to be modeling there. If we're helping for regulatory work, then the situation is slightly different, because everything has to be a bit more transparent, and we have to make sure that the regulators can piece together every single bit of our calculation, so they know where they can get the study that we used and comb through it for any mistakes we made and so on.
Sure, because I guess that there are sort of your multiple sort of options when actually sort of looking at how, for example, a disease patient might change through a treatment. So therefore, that you're having to make assumptions which will be challenged. Yeah.
Yeah, and obviously the challenges can come from any direction. So the main focus for us is just the transparency, because we'll almost always have to make some kind of assumptions or bring different data sources together to get to hone in on the population of interest. So, you know, that's inevitable. The key thing is transparency in the methods, and, you know, complete citation of all of the studies used, as well as, if needed, a code review and of the case detection algorithm that we used if we were querying electronic health records, for example, or claims data set.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, you sort of mentioned the regulators. I mean, sort of, you know, one of the places where biotech companies have the ability to transform themselves from sort of a research-based company into, you know, a commercial entity is in the orphan drug space.
Yeah.
Given that, you know, I guess that these are targeting very, very rare diseases, how challenging is it to sort of develop a robust epi data set to both determine whether an indication actually, I guess, qualifies for orphan drug designation, or actually, you know, supports having limited R&D resources actually deployed to support it?
So the orphan drug space, whether it's for the FDA or the EMA, the epidemiology comes in there not just by sizing the eligible population per se, but also checking that it's below the relevant threshold. They're slightly different between the FDA and the EMA. Given the fact that it's often for rare disease, that means that the available epidemiological data, particularly that's published in peer-reviewed studies or even conference abstracts, may either be of poor quality, not giving us exactly what we want, or just in many cases just doesn't exist, at least in one place. So the challenges for us are dealing with that data paucity. If it's a well-coded disease, by which I mean either an ICD code or a SNOMED code, which are used particularly in electronic health records and are much more granular than ICD, then we can obviously do a custom study in our electronic health records data set, for example. And then actually it's quite straightforward for us because we're familiar with what the thresholds are, we can do the study, and so on. It becomes more difficult where, for whatever reason, we can't use electronic health records, let's say, and we have to piece together the bits from the available literature. Then it can be the case of getting birth incidence from one study, survival for another, or prognosis from another study, and then bringing them together and stratifying by age and then applying to different countries and so on. So there can be different steps that are needed there to get exactly where we want to go. But obviously the key thing, again, I want to emphasize is just transparency when we're doing orphan drug applications. And ideally, if we're doing any custom studies, to publish those out as well, or at least give a good description of where the data is coming from.
Right. Now, I also mentioned that in my introduction that the go no go decision, you know, particularly when sort of, you know, companies are looking to so go from one phase to another and are looking to sort of invest substantial amounts of money in sort of clinical development, etc. I just wondered, again, how epi can be used or has been used to sort of facilitate that decision, and particularly, say, for example, in the orphan space. What are the sort of specific challenges on that?
So the epidemiology is going to be needed at every right from the beginning through to post-launch. but it may be used in different ways and it may be in different forms. So before even phase 1, I would say it's important to have a good estimate. At that point, it doesn't need to be, a very refined or, robust estimate of the drug treatable size. But you obviously have to start there, because if your drug candidate can only end up treating 15 patients, then that's a very different sales proposition, if you like, that you have to make than if it's treating 15,000 patients, although they both obviously be considered rare conditions. By phase 2, that's when stratification can often start. So there may be hints or suggestions of the drug being more effective in a particular subpopulation or subtype of the disease. And that is actually a situation we're dealing with now, with a very rare form of an inherited disorder where the drug may be more relevant in a particular subpopulation of that. And that is at that kind of phase 2, phase 3 interface stage of development, where things are starting to be refined. Phase 3 is starting to be planned, and so on. So that's where I think the epidemiology comes in between the different phases. And if it means that the subpopulation is much smaller than initially thought, or the disease population that doesn't look quite how you thought it was going to be based on your initial decision to go to phase 1, then obviously that can be a go no-go decision, because your patient population may look very different in terms of its size as well as clinical characteristics than you originally thought.
Right. And then presumably for strategic sort of, or tactical marketing plans, I guess epi again can be used just in terms of identifying where you might want to launch your product at least first, or in which indications you want to launch your product.
Yeah, so certainly the epidemiology can help rank, if you like, the potential indications where a drug that may be treating the same target, if you like, across multiple diseases. And we do get that quite often in cancer indications, where the drug candidate may be eligible to treat 5 or 6 different tumors based on the expression of a particular drug biomarker, and then the decision may not be, oh, let's go for the tumor with the most number of people who have the tumor, because that space may already be very crowded, and instead go for one where there is high unmet need, either because the tumor is much more aggressive, there's far more people progressing to later stages of disease, which is obviously something we can help with, or it's not a crowded space, a commercial space with loads of drug companies competing over the same patient population.
I mean, there are plenty of examples of companies either underestimating or overestimating the potential of the drugs that they were developing. Maybe that was because they didn't understand the epi well enough. Sort of looking at the sort of the companies that you've helped, it sounds like sometimes you mentioned how actually the various phases, epi can help. Do companies always sort of turn up at the 11th hour for help? I'm just trying to sort of get a sense of what is the sort of what is the best time in that discovery development timeline for people to start getting a really good grasp of the epi of the diseases that they're focusing on.
Yeah, so there are some companies that turn up at the 11th hour. They've got themselves tied in knots, not knowing what the next step is, having conflicting opinions or conflicting results in the evidence. So my advice is always don't start the 11th hour, start at bright and early 6 a.m. in the morning rather than the last minute. As I said, I think epidemiology should be with you all the way through the drug development and post-launch as well. But at least at the beginning, have some, it can be a range of estimates, but have some estimates of what the patient population is, that the size of the population is that you're pursuing.
Yeah, sure. So look, Mike, this has been really, really interesting. And as I say, it's epidemiology is one of those things that you hear on the sort of the government briefings every day, and it's one of those words that just look great on a Scrabble board. So it's really good to sort of hear actually how it can be, how it's useful in those decisions. So thanks very much for taking the time to speak to us today, and I'm sure there'll be lots in our audience who are going to really benefit from hearing what you said. So if after listening to this broadcast you'd like to tune into future Conversations in Health, follow our LinkedIn page where we'll be posting alerts for future episodes. So in closing, I'd like to thank Mike again for joining us, and thank you, the listeners, for tuning in. So stay safe and healthy. I'm Mike Ward, and I'll see you in the next episode.